He's a college football analyst for the good people at Fox Sports, at Bruce Feldman, CFB on Twitter. He's also the author, and I'm holding up, radio audience, the paperback version of the QB, the making of modern quarterbacks. Bruce Feldman here in person, as opposed to on the phone on the Rich Eisen Show. What's up, bud?
I'm glad to see you. It was
good
a
to
short
see
drive
you.
for me.
I'm very glad it was a short drive for you. What do you make of the college football playoff rankings being the same? That's no surprise, correct?
It's not, but look, we can't take it with a grain of salt. Remember, when they started last year, Ohio State was 16th. They obviously ended up winning it. So people get up in arms about it. A lot of this stuff is going to shake out. If you're an Iowa fan and you look and go, hey, we have better wins than Ohio State does, you win out Iowa, you're going to the playoff.
Right.
If. That's a big if.
Well, let's do a quick phone call about that. Let's take Rob in Austin, Texas, right here on the Rich Eisen Show. Rob, you're with Bruce Feldman.
Hey, Rich. I'm wondering on that point do you think the committee looks at a quality win as more important than a bad loss? So, for example, you have Iowa, who beat Wisconsin in Madison. Wisconsin's only lost to Iowa and Alabama. Or you have Oklahoma, who got trampled by a really bad Texas team.
Thank you for the call. How do you respond to that, Bruce?
I think he's partly right. I think they look at everything, but ultimately I think it's very, very subjective. I mean, you're going to give, if you're the committee, look at Ohio State's resume. What is the most impressive win they have so far? Beating Penn State. Penn State's not that good this year. Winning at Rutgers, who's awful. So, but when you asked Jeff Long last week about it, when we talked to him, he's the committee chairman of the playoff, and he said, well, potentially, we think they're going to get a lot better down the road. I mean, so the eyeball test is really, it's almost like Mike Mayock's eyeball, because we know they're loaded with first-round picks, and they're getting the benefit of the doubt because they won the national title last year. Some of these other teams are not going to get the benefit of the doubt. So they're picking and choosing the rationale, and there's, whatever, a dozen people in the room, so they all have different criteria, what they value.
So essentially, it's how the Big 12 plays out, because I don't think anybody expects Auburn to shock Alabama, right, or Clemson to trip up.
Or Georgia to knock off Alabama. You would think, I mean, the way that Alabama has dominated people in the last month, and their quarterback situation's kind of sorted itself out a little bit, that Alabama's going to get there. I don't think the issue here is going to be who's coming out of the SEC, because even if Florida beats them, then Florida's going to go.
Right.
I think the issue is going to be, does Oklahoma State, do they somehow make it undefeated? They still have Baylor and they still have Oklahoma. If they're undefeated, I think Oklahoma State will be the Big 12 team that gets in. Where it gets a little crazy, or really crazy, is what happens with Notre Dame. Notre Dame is right now number 4. Notre Dame's best wins on their resume right now, really their best win is Navy. Navy only has 1 loss, had a really good year. They had Temple on their resume, which still technically, it doesn't look as good because Temple got beat by 3 touchdowns to USF last week. Notre Dame needs USC, who they've already beaten, to win out and be like, 10-3, win the Pac-12. That makes it a more valuable win. What I think interesting dynamic here is Oklahoma's playing really well. If Oklahoma wins out, they would be 11-1. And then it comes back to what he said before. Lost to Texas really bad. Notre Dame killed Texas.
But I'm with Bruce Feldman here on the Rich Eisen Show. It's kind of stupid that a team that plays as well as they play in November has to root for a Pac-12 team that's been out of it and fired their coach for several weeks to start winning, because that win over them becomes more valuable in the eyes, as opposed to just making it 8 teams already and just figuring this thing out. ESPN would raise their hands and say, we'll televise it. Your network would raise their hands and say, we'll go into bidding war, we'll televise it. And then, because right now, I mean, they're lucky that there's no Pac-12 team that's sort of circling around right here, that be on the outside looking in. You're going to have a Big 12, SEC, Big 10, Pac-12, Notre Dame, every single year, another Big 5 conference that's going to be circling around with the ACC, trying to get in here, and unless they want this kind of a conversation that you and I are having right now.
You can still have the conversation. If you have 8 teams, and I know people don't like that, because they go, it's going to devalue the regular season. You have your 5 teams that win your conference, and then you would have 3 at-large teams. There would still be a big conversation. I mean, look, University of Houston may go undefeated. They're not really part of this. And now, would that be a bad dynamic if they're the 8th seed and they're playing Clemson, who's a number 1 seed? I wouldn't be shocked if Houston could give them a good game and maybe even knock them off.
But that's a fallacious argument that we heard throughout the trying to get rid of the BCS, is that a playoff will devalue the regular season.
Well, those are bowl people clinging to the control they had.
Yeah. Because we all know that we need to open a window and let some new fresh air in on a bowl system. That's so ancient history. These folks need to understand that they're dinosaurs walking around in oddly colored jackets. But because, for instance, Michigan with 2 losses, just my alma mater. Utah with 2 losses. Stanford with 2 losses. Florida State with 2 losses. LSU with 2 losses. Right now, if there was an 8-team playoff, would have a shot at getting in.
Yeah,
absolutely. But one more loss over the next 2 weeks, finished. And their regular season games that they're playing over the next couple of weeks.
They matter. I think what they worry about, and they being the power brokers of college football, is you go from 4 to 8, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, they're going to go to 16 to 32. They don't want it to go that far, and I think the feeling is it's a slippery slope. I think eventually it'll go to 8. This contract goes to, for another 10 or 11 years.
Oh my gosh.
I think at some point before then, I think they will. One of these power brokers will get irked because his champion will get left off 2 years in a row, and then they will say, hey, we got to have that. But, by the way, your Michigan team, I actually think, has a outside shot to still get in.
Don't say that, because you're going to get me so... Don't.
Look, if
how does that happen? That they beat Penn State, Ohio State, and Iowa? They're going to take a 2-loss Michigan team and put them in the top 4? They would really do that?
You beat Ohio State. Let's say Ohio State beats Michigan State, which I think is going to happen.
Okay.
Then Ohio State is going to be undefeated. They're also probably they may be number 1 or number 2 at that point. The committee is just begging Ohio State to give them a reason to be number 1 or number 2.
Sure.
Michigan, if they beat them, that will be the best win anybody has had this season. If they go on and beat an undefeated Iowa team, you remember, they also dominated Northwestern. They beat BYU. They had a close loss at the beginning of the year at Utah, and they lost on a fluky-ish play to Michigan State. If
you could take the ish out of that.
Fair enough.
Word.
But if you pair them up against, let's say Stanford beats Notre Dame, Stanford wins the Pac-12, they're 11-2. Mm-hmm. I know you didn't like this argument before. You might like it now. If Michigan is 11-2, having beaten Ohio State and beaten Iowa, they also have blown out Northwestern, beat them by like 30, whereas Northwestern beat Stanford, who and held them to 6 points. I think that would be a pretty strong case, especially when you're talking about a team that would have proven that it's playing great down the stretch.
But even with saying Notre Dame winning out and a Big 12 team like, say, Oklahoma State still remains undefeated, they would take the Ohio State slot. That's what there's a slot. There's essentially a slot in the Final Four for an SEC and a Big Ten team, is what you're saying right now.
Yes, and remember, if Stanford beats Notre Dame, that game's in Stanford. Notre Dame's out of the mix.
If I'm in the Big 12 right now or the ACC, why wouldn't I be flipping out, saying, because you're as locked in as possible right now, and they're essentially saying SEC, Big Ten, whoever wins that, you got a spot. But Big 12, you got to prove something to me. Clemson, you've got to win out. I mean,
Clemson
is there
has
something
to win
wrong
out.
with that?
Well, yeah, but I think what the committee has said, and I'm glad you brought up ACC. Right now, North Carolina is playing really well. They started the year with a bad loss against South Carolina, but they've won out since. Now, they have no wins over ranked teams. They also play in the non-conference 2 FCS teams. Mm-hmm. If you look at what, the committee holds against the Big 12 top teams or better teams, it's against Baylor and against Oklahoma State. Their non-conference schedules are awful. And I think the message here is you guys got to schedule better games in your non-conference. You control that. In the case of Michigan, they went to Utah, played a good team on the road. Sure. I mean, actually, BYU is a really good team. That's, it's like, and then I think there was Oregon State in there, and Oregon State's down this year, but it's a Power 5. I think what the committee wants to do is reward teams for stepping up and playing good teams in the non-conference. If you're Baylor, and I'm sorry, I like Baylor, but Baylor's basically said, we don't worry about the non-conference. We're going to let it sort out. You have no margin for error then, because if you lose to anybody, I think you're basically looking up and going, well, we shot our load at this and it's not going to work.
So you're saying essentially that if Brady Hoke's top recruit, Jabril Peppers, continues to ball out, and thanks to Dave Brandon's scheduling of Utah at Utah, Jim Harbaugh's mastery of taking all of that and making a playoff team could actually help Michigan altogether.
Yeah, I think so. Look,
that would be unbelievable.
Look,
I mean, that would just truly be off the charts.
I mean, I think at this point, I think Michigan has probably a better chance of knocking off Ohio State than Michigan State does. Part of it, and look, I think Mark D'Antonio is a great coach, but Michigan has... one of the 3 best coaches in college football, and I wouldn't put anything past them, and who knows, the rivalry game, you never know.
Bruce Feldman of Fox Sports here on the Rich Eisen Show. Law, you want to find something?
Just a question about the scheduling, because colleges schedule their season sometimes 5 years in advance. Mm-hmm. And like you said, Oregon State is on paper a good Pac-12 opponent, but a down year. Do they have to do something where they change this, or the NCAA regulates that if you want to be an eligible team for this, you can't play a Division II or subdivision team?
Yeah, I think what the difference here is, what you're talking about is, Oregon State's a Power 5,
Yeah.
They're having a down year, and you're right. You don't know when somebody's good, or, a couple of years ago, Notre Dame, when they went to the title game, played Miami, and Miami was awful. Miami's usually pretty good. Florida State, some of the teams they schedule, it's not their fault that they're down that year.
Exactly.
When I spoke to Jeff Long, who's a committee chair, about a month ago about this very issue, he said it's like they consider it, but they don't really take it that much into like, okay, it is what it is. They're going to say, okay, we're not going to ding you for this, but we're also not going to reward you for scheduling a team that happens to be really bad. The issue is with these non-FBS programs, a Division II school or an FCS school, if you're playing that, they're like, you're not even trying. And that's the part where they're going to hold it against you, which is, like I said, North Carolina has 2 of them. Baylor has really bad teams. Baylor has Rice, who's 4-6. That's the best of their 3 teams. SMU, who's like 1-9, and then an FCS team.
But can't they say we're playing locals? That's what they're doing, right? Rice, SMU. Can't they just sit there and say we're just trying to cater to our fan base?
How would your fan base feel if you guys played Alma?
I wouldn't like it. I hear you. I know what you're saying. I hear you. Before I let you go, what's going on with the Miami gig? What can you tell me that's sitting out there with the U?
Yeah, there's some interesting players in this. Now, the biggest names in it would be Butch Davis, who really wants the job.
Yeah, he's wanted it for a long time.
He's wanted it for a long time. Now, he left there. The 2 things, what I was told this weekend, he has some big money people at UM in his corner, but there is some resistance to him. Even though he was not directly implicated in the scandal at North Carolina, the NCAA cleared him. And when I did a story on Butch probably 2 years ago, he showed me the letter he got from the NCAA clearing him. There's still some concern, from some Miami brass about him. I was told he's a fallback candidate. Charlie Strong is a bit of a wild card on this. From what I've heard, Charlie Strong would have some interest. I know, and I've heard this from multiple sources now, I know from Charlie Strong has come out and said, look, I have the best job in college football. When I was told by somebody else, said, yeah, that may be true about Texas. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the best situation for him. The question is now, not only if Charlie Strong has interest, does Miami really have that much interest in Charlie Strong? If he goes 4-8, which is possible, or at the best probably 5-7, I'm not sure how much they would want him, especially considering it's going to cost them a lot of money. So those are 2 names. Then there's, look, I think they're going to look at Mario Cristobal, who's a former assistant and player. He's on Nick Saban's staff. He's as plugged into anybody in the South Florida recruiting scene. He also really wants the job. A guy like Rob Chudzinski's name has been floated by a lot of the players.
Colts.
Yeah.
What about a former player like, I know Ed Reed said he wanted a phone call or something like that, but Ken Dorsey is sitting there in Carolina right now.
I think Ken would be the best option for them if they were going to say, hey, we're looking at maybe bringing him as an offensive coordinator. I'm not sure, and I like Ken. I think he's really sharp and he's going to have a great future, but I don't know if they think he's ready to run a program yet. I think now if he's a coordinator, that's a different story. And I could see one of those guys, even whether it's a Greg Schiano, if he were to get it, I think it's a little more of a reach. Chud, certainly, I think Cristobal would reach out to him if he wants to come back. I'm sure they would love it if Ed wanted to be their special teams guy or defensive backs coach.
Well, if it's such an easy drive for you to come here, will you come back?
Yeah, I'll definitely come back.
I'd love it because there's so much going on, obviously, in your world and beyond, even just this season. Thanks for coming in. Bruce Feldman is here. Go get his book. It's paperback right now. The QB, the making of the modern quarterbacks. Bruce Feldman on Fox Sports as well as Twitter at Bruce Feldman CFB. Thanks for coming on, brother.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern. On Audience.